I've never truly waded into the golden age of comics. For many, they only know the golden age through flagpole characters like Superman. In fact, the agreed upon start of the golden age of comics is the introduction of Superman in Action Comics #1 in 1938. Detective Comics, the predecessor to DC Comics, which, yes, basically went with the WWE levels of rebranding when it began to consume other publishers and their properties, and one of those companies was Quality Comics. Yes, that may have been a weird way to set up talking about Quality Comics, but hey, this is going to be pretty much a test episode for publisher versions of reader histories, so let's not let the small things weigh us down. Quality Comics began life as the Comics Favorite Inc., created in 1937 by Everett Busy Arnold, and boy, in his life did he ever live up to that schoolyard nickname, because this wasn't his first foray into publishing. He originally worked as a printing press manufacturer, then spent over a decade as a sales rep for a different manufacturer, where he did make sales to notable comic syndicates like Eastern Color Printing, who would go on to print the very first true American comic book, Famous Funnies, alongside Dell, who are their own video series, believe me, as well as the McClure Syndicate of Maryland. Sidebar, I kind of wish we still called them syndicates, because that makes the job sound so much cooler. I mean, would you rather buy from an indie darling Aftershock Comics, or the hard as nails Aftershock Syndicate? Joking aside, Busy actually talked a Buffalo, New York-based printer to buy a color plant to publish comics, and he would be the vice president of Greater Buffalo Press, learning the publishing trade as they began to print large orders of colored newspaper comic strips. Yes, modern comics owe their entire history to the Sunday Funnies. Oh, Marmaduke, you so crazy. In 1936, Arnold helped out the New York City-based Comics Magazine Company, which would publish several comic strip reprints and original works, which include Dr. Mystic the Occult Detective by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Yeah, Busy can even be linked with the creators of Superman. While there's no definitive answer on how Busy helped, the general consensus by comic historians and archivists is that it was a financial backing, with the main benefits for Busy not being some high return, though he did make money off the deal, but wider context for when he finally made his big move. Now we reach when Comic Favorites Inc. was created, 1937. Busy collaborated with 3 other comic syndicates to create a magazine that focused on reprinting familiar and well-liked comic strips in color due to the marketability of the familiar, though new features would be added later on. My personal favorite detail about this is that to create feature funnies, Busy hired a cartoonist, who, the now household name of Rube Goldberg, and his assistant Johnny Devlin. Yes, the Pulitzer Prize winning political cartoonist worked here. I was actually very much surprised about this, though I'm sure everyone else would be surprised to know that he won a Pulitzer Prize and was a cartoonist, since he's a household name solely because of his overly complicated gadgets that do mundane things that people like Adam Savage have taken to a whole new level. Look it up if you don't know what I mean. So new content would be brought in from comic packagers, who are basically on-demand producers of content. These packagers may also sound familiar to you, such as Will Eisner and Jerry Iger, who ran Eisner and Iger. Yeah, I know, an inventive name. As well as Harry A. Chesler, the guy behind the very first ever packagers. Eventually, though, the popularity allowed for a wide in-house staff, leading to the formation of their very first masked hero, The Clock. Their success allowed for Arnold to partner with the owners of Register and Tribune Syndicate to buy out the McNaught Syndicate and the Frank J. Markey Syndicate, leading to the corporate entity Comic Magazines Inc., and that year, in 1939, Smash Comics #1 was the first comic to be published of theirs to have exclusively original work. Then, the main office moved to Stamford, Connecticut, and really began to use the Quality Comics logo, first debuting on the cover of Crack Comics #5 in 1940. And according to the Connecticut Historical Society, which I'm sure was a villain in a Lovecraft story, the Quality Comics Group is a trademarked name that encompasses Comics Favorite Inc., E.M. Arnold Productions, Smash Comics, and any and all other imprints owned by Arnold. Though I think there may be some conflicting information on that, as of a 1954 federal document, Quality Romance Group, owned by Arnold and his wife, Claire, controlled several titles under Arnold Publication, Comics Favorites, and Comics Magazine Inc. The only reason I say this could be a conflict is because it was co-owned by his wife, so not sure how the contracts worked in the 50s. By the 1950s, television has become a prominent form of entertainment, which did hurt the comics industry. Ultimately, though, I would say that it was Frederick Wortham's crucifixion of the comic industry, called Seduction of the Innocent, in 1954, that truly buried Quality Comics and so many other publishers in that time. Quality Comics had war, romance, and horror publications, and when the hammer came down on the industry, books like that were the first to go, leading to a severe cut in output, and in 1956, Quality Comics sold many of their properties to National Periodicals Publication, yet another one of the companies that would become DC Comics in later years. But while Quality Comics may have dissolved under the changing times, their legacy is felt even today. Everett Busy Arnold himself seemed to be a linchpin connecting between several massive companies, but my personal favorite story about Arnold is that in 1939, he had a lunch meeting with Will Eisner about creating a new property to sell to newspapers. Eisner agreed, and thus the Spirit was created and distributed. I mean, that's just neat, and I never knew that aspect of the story. Yes, that's a very abridged take on what happened. There's interviews with Eisner where he talks about it more, but this is just nifty. Arnold is also known as someone who was very generous to artists and creators he worked with, even giving bonuses for quality work and loyalty. Yes, that makes him literally the only boss to ever do this in the comic industry ever. That may make him the anti-Stan Lee. But Arnold isn't the only person of interest linked to Quality Comics. I dropped Rube Goldberg and Will Eisner's name earlier, but there are so many more characters that are still very prominent today. Plastic Man, for instance, was introduced in Police Comics #1 in 1941, and actually has a current solo series that began in June 2018 for posterity's sake, and has become a fan-favorite character for his humor and sass. But of course, my personal favorite, and yes, there will be a reader's history when I can afford it, is Black Hawk, which would also lead to the Black Hawks, and a staple group of the DC universe, no matter what crisis comes along. Speaking of crisis, when the DC multiverse became a thing, Quality Comics actually had two universes, Earth Quality and the much more interesting Earth X. Earth Quality was basically just the world that the Quality Comics existed in, with a very unique World War II considering that fact. But Earth X is probably the more well-known world, with the Freedom Fighters, a supergroup of Quality characters, were the last bastion of heroes in a world where the Nazis won World War II. Believe me, we'll be getting to that very shortly. But it's those Freedom Fighters that are the most lasting overall vestige of Quality Comics as a whole. They've been adapted into every iteration of the DC universe, with the Nazi world they're inhabiting being one of the most popular alternate worlds in that multiverse. So what is there to say in conclusion about Quality Comics? It may no longer exist, but without this publisher, and without Busy Arnold's busybody work ethic, the landscape of modern comics would be vastly different. Would it be worse? Maybe. But the golden age of comic books had many companies, and for me, I think Quality Comics should be one of the remembered fallen, as it was such a positive force in comic history. And with that, I'm the Comic Archivist, and as always, stay golden, Inklings. Hey everyone, this is the Comic Archivist. If you agree, disagree, or just want to add your 2 cents in on this video, then leave a comment below. While you're down there, please let me know what you'd like to see on the next Binging on Comics, Reader's History, or any of the other wonderful shows we have on this channel. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and please consider supporting us on Patreon. But if you can't donate, just sharing and subscribing grows the channel just as well. But above and beyond anything else, thank you so much for watching, and as always, stay golden, Inklings.